Swords, sorcery, fantasy beyond your wildest imaginations, muscles, and more can all be found in the land of Eternia. Created in 1982-ish, He-Man and the Masters of the Universe is one of the pioneering toy lines of the 80s nostalgia hellscape we still roam today. Now, He-Masters hasn't survived as well as, say, Transformers, becoming a pop culture mainstay, but is still iconic nonetheless. Now, personally speaking, I've always been mixed on He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. There's a lot of things I like, but also a lot of things I could do without. I've always liked the iconography, the imagery, and the aesthetics, but a lot of things have never jived with me, like the cartoon or the toys. I can laugh at the Filmation cartoon, I can laugh at it, but it's not one I'm a huge fan of like G.I. Joe or the Transformers. But here's the thing, it doesn't matter how much you're a fan of the cartoon or the toys, I think, universally, everybody likes
Skeletor, the master of the universe.
That's right, just as beloved as the blonde bombshell namesake of the franchise is his eternal adversary, Skeletor. Released back in 1982, this is Mattel's He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, Skeletor, a genuinely beloved baddie of the New Wave era. Released as part of Wave 1, Skeletor sets the tone of the evil that lurks within Eternia's shadows. Now, Mattel's He-Man selection set itself apart from the other 80s toy lines by being distinctly chunkier, beefier, more jacked, more ripped, and more bulked than their competition. Even though Skeletor's presumably some kind of skeleton man, he's been bulking up with some calcium because he is jacked. Skeletor is primarily a powder blue with purple armor accents and a phosphorus yellow skull within a hood. You might have noticed our bony boy is also a little rosy-cheeked, and that's because this is an early production variant, sometimes called Pink Cheek Skeletor and also Half Boots Skeletor. By no means are variants abnormal, especially early on in a production run. Most of the time, a factory might misinterpret details seen on a character model. Other times, plastic colors and paint tones might change based off of the resources on hand. And other times, the manufacturer will send addendums that don't make it on time. In Skeletor's case, the paint application meant to contrast his cheeks was meant to be a lot darker, but came out very bright. And in addition to that, he also has the half boots. This error could actually be an interpretation of the original concept art, where he has shin guards rather than buccaneer boots. Outside of his armor, his major accessories include the Havoc Staff, which is the super heavy metal looking purple ram skull on a crook. It's super cool, and I get why some pearl clutchers in the 80s would look at this and think Satan. His other major accessory is the Power Sword, which isn't that He-Man's weapon? Well, yes and no. It's one of the early ideas that Masters of the Universe had that really didn't pan out. One of the early ideas is that the Power Sword would actually be divided into a light and dark side, a yin and a yang, if you will.
Again, it's like poetry, so if they rhyme.
And whichever warrior brave or determined enough to unite the two swords could control Castle Grayskull, the focus of Skeletor's evil machinations. This didn't really make it into the He-Man story, or cartoon, or comics, or get any focus really. I think, honestly, Mattel just kind of forgot, leaving Skeletor as the great evil. But as someone once said, behind every great man is a great woman, and behind this evil man stands Evil-Lyn. That's right, this episode is a twofer. Released in 1983, Evil-Lyn bewitches and enchants the Masters of the Universe. And first and foremost, Evil-Lyn is a repaint retool from Teela 1 year prior. She forgoes Teela's white and gold hues for the much more dark and mysterious blues, though she does have a very oddly jaundiced skin tone. While I think it's a very odd choice, I'm sure the reason Mattel made her a bright yellow was to make her pop on toy store shelves, thinking her being both a girl and a villain would be a detriment to sales. Taking a quick look at her concept art, she's pretty close to the final production model. However, her crystal ball has been changed to a staff, and her name was originally Sultra. The notes also state she's supposed to have a bit of a Sophia Loren look, which does track, especially with the makeup. I mean, not many people can pull off the peacock blue 70s eyeshadow. By 1983, when Evil-Lyn came out, Masters of the Universe was a lot more ironed out and familiar to what we know it as today. 82, 81, on the other hand, well, that's a different story. Skeletor's concept goes all the way back to 1979, when artist Mark Taylor had been workshopping various sword and sorcery concepts. A lot of these early concepts were influenced by pulp fantasy art and stories, with the major influences coming from artist Frank Frazetta, as well as the written works of Robert E. Howard. And a lot of the influences were definitely drawn from Cole the Conqueror and Conan the Barbarian. And I bring these two up specifically because Skeletor is very similar to the original Thulsa Doom, who was a skeletal lich in Robert E. Howard's work. And Skeletor's other major influence was a dead body.
What?
According to artist Mark Taylor, when he was a wee lad, he went to Pike's Amusement Park in Long Beach, California, and in the haunted house ride, he was shocked and disturbed by a bizarre hanged man prop. But this wax dummy was a little more than meets the eye. And if any of that rings alarm bells in your head, that's because you've watched way too much YouTube and have seen Nella's dead body hijinks, one of the best videos on the platform. Look, I can't top that video, but I'll give you the quick and dirty on Elmer McCurdy. See, back in the ancient West, this outlaw got deaded pretty good, and because nobody claimed his body, the mortician decided to make a quick buck by making him a touring attraction. After a few decades of getting traded back and forth, bought and sold and stolen, it was quickly forgotten that McCurdy was, well, a dead body, and eventually he was sold to Pike's Amusement Zone as a hanged man prop. And it wasn't until they were filming an episode of The $6 Million Man that a stagehand learned the truth the hard way.
Wait a minute, that's curious. This mannequin's got human flesh and bones inside of it. Wait a minute.
Skeletor's more corpulent influence can still be seen in the original concept art, where instead of a skull, he had much more of a rotting, desiccated face, not too dissimilar to the Crispy Master from Doctor Who. While McCurdy might be dead and buried, Skeletor still survives. See, the evangelicals stocking the toy store aisles in the 80s weren't wrong. Skeletor is indeed a demonic presence, except that's only in comic books. In the early mini-comics, the pack-in material for the figures, the story beats, ideas, and concepts of the He-Man crew were still very dark fantasy. These things weren't ironed out, and Skeletor was a demonic extra-dimensional entity looking to rule Eternia. In this post-nuclear apocalypse hellscape of magic and science, the only one who can stop this demonic entity is a brave wandering barbarian by the name of He-Man. And in a concept brought up by Mark Taylor but never finalized into He-Man, Skeletor was the son of the cruel king of Eternia and a witch, and he was banished to a hell dimension after attempting to usurp his father. And in a similar plot beat, He-Man is the son of the same king and a slave woman. The king, fearing another assassination, wants to kill the child, but he is spirited away by the kindly Man-at-Arms, who raises him in the wilds of Eternia as a wandering barbarian. This tone is very intriguing to me, and I'd love to see He-Man as a grim, dark fantasy in a similar way to Conan the Barbarian, Cole the Conqueror, or Berserk. And while some of these ideas did make its way into the early mini-comics, storybooks, and ancillary merchandise, it was pretty much all paved over by the Filmation cartoon. The Filmation cartoon is undeniably camp, it's goofy, it's corny, it's fun, it's very endearing. A lot of the love that we see in Masters of the Universe really does come from this cartoon, especially the characterizations of the He-Man and the Masters of the Universe cast. Here, Skeletor is not the dark, evil lich looking to inflict cruel punishment upon a world that's wronged him. Instead, he's more about shenanigans.
No, I don't want any spoo. I hate spoo. I don't even know what spoo is.
Not unlike Cobra Commander, Skeletor is also a pretty high-strung dude who's surrounded by goons and goobers looking to carry out his evil will.
She's fated.
Just like a woman.
Most of the time, his evil machinations really boil down to making King Randor look like a goofball, or pulling one over on He-Man, or carving his face into a mountain. It's usually pretty innocent, and it's all shenanigans based. And by the end of the episode, he's usually very easily flustered or bamboozled.
You really are wonderful.
Listen, I am not nice, I am not kind, and I am not Wonderful.
The cartoon is also where we get the majority of Evil-Lyn's characterization, as well as her relationship with Skeletor. I don't think they actually are married as much as I joke about that, but they're definitely in some domestic partnership, probably for tax purposes. They do live together on Snake Mountain after all. For the most part, she is actually very supportive of Skeletor's dumbass schemes and shenanigans, and she does stand by his side most of the time, if only just to see where things go. Evil-Lyn does have her own schemes and machinations for power. Sometimes that involves honeypotting some hobbits, and sometimes that involves throwing Skeletor under the bus, but clearly they're okay with it because they make up by the end of the day.
I'd like to see the real Skeletor all wrapped up like that.
Perhaps someday you will.
I would hesitate to call them a power couple because honestly their relationship is probably as stable as a South American dictatorship, but it's undeniable that they have chemistry. From here though, we get two different branching continuities for Skeletor. In the Filmation series, we learn that Skeletor is an alien under the control of Hordak and his evil horde. He was kind of abandoned on Eternia, and he's just been doing his own thing ever since. In the other direction, we have other mini-comics. And in this, instead of Skeletor being an alien or extra-dimensional evil, he's possibly the half-brother of King Randor, making him He-Man's uncle. This was never developed fully in the Vintage era, and that's because the toy line was quietly being cancelled and scuttled off to Europe, as vintage toy lines tend to do. Instead, these concepts got expanded upon in the modern era, whether that is the 2000s Cartoon Network reboot, the Revelation series on Netflix, or the tie-in comics for the Masters of the Universe Classic toy line. So where does that leave Skeletor and Evil-Lyn? Well, honestly, kind of back at square one in the grand scheme of things. See, Mattel has come out with the Masters of the Universe Origins series, which are essentially modernizations of the original figures. These figures are engineering updates of the original 80s toys. No longer are they stuck in the squatty poses with elastic bands in their hips, but instead are articulated like modern Marvel Legends style action figures, but retain the vintage aesthetic. The Skeletor figure is very articulate, he's very posable and expressive. He's much more homogenized to what we think of Skeletor as now, and does not have any of the variations like we'd see in the original toy. He still includes the Havoc staff, but instead of having half of a power sword, he has a full power sword. Cast in purple and sculpted like the original, it's a much more dynamic weapon than the half that we saw back in the 80s. On the other hand, Evil-Lyn contrasts a lot more with her vintage counterpart. While this one is sculpted to resemble her original toy, it is colored more similar to the Filmation adaptation. The primarily blue outfit as well as the jaundiced skin are gone. Instead, we have a much more gothy black and purple ensemble with this alabaster skin tone. It does make her a lot more witchy and spooky and a little vampiric even, and honestly, I do think this is the color palette the 80s original should have had. My only criticism is the Sophia Loren look is gone. I really miss that peacock blue eyeshadow. It's kind of funny, He-Man and the Masters of the Universe has been very stagnant compared to the other 80s toy franchises that survive today. There's a lot of interesting ideas and concepts that can be mined from this series, but for whatever reason, the new interpretations just don't hit with audiences. Personally speaking, I think one of the best things to come out of the entire franchise is actually the Netflix She-Ra reboot, which takes a lot of the ideas from Princesses of Power and spins them in a new, bold, and interesting direction. He-Man, on the other hand, is still locked in the same battle as we saw in the 80s. But in some respects, that's what also makes it iconic, especially He-Man's eternal rival, Skeletor. It will always be informed by both the lore tidbits from the original mini-comics, as well as his defining characterization in the Filmation cartoon. He may be this spooky, evil warrior looking to wreak havoc upon Eternia, but he's also this high-strung, bumbling, easily flustered villain. And that's what makes him both beloved and feared by all of Eternia.